Well, NMIXX, you've done it again. I am consistently impressed by this group. Their range, their willingness to try new things. Blue Valentine jumps between sounds and concepts in unexpected ways that at times is a little hard to keep up with. The time it took for me to register what was happening with each new song was killing me, but once I was on board, I immediately saw the vision. This album is unpredictable in a way that feels earned. Each shift feels like it's being tended to. There was definitely an effort to fine-tune the chaos just enough to make the album feel intentional and cohesive. Of course, you can always expect some level of versatility from NMIXX. That's basically their whole brand, but this time there's a palpable sense of intent behind the madness. The best way I can describe the vibe of Blue Valentine, and honestly the album as a whole, is emo band kid chic. Think mid-2010s theater and/or band kid energy, but channeled through modern pop production. There's this really strong Panic at the Disco sensibility I got right from the top of the album, especially like a Fever You Can't Sweat Out era Panic. So think about an emo band kid in 2015 discovering that album and it kind of becoming their world. That's the vibe I pulled from this album right at the start. There's a burgeoning sense of angst that feels processed through theater and performance. When it comes to the title track, you get the dramatic strings, this, I think, staccato piano riff that gives an almost satirical stage play feel, and of course the drums playing around with pace in the pre-choruses. It sounds like they're underscoring some kind of emotional breakdown in real time. Yeah, that's generally the vibe or atmosphere I identify immediately. And it's not just Panic. There are traces of My Chemical Romance's melodrama, Fall Out Boy, Paramore's emotional volatility. Does that make sense? Am I over-explaining this? It's that same kind of maximalist emotionality that made these artists so magnetic. Like the idea that the song itself is a theatrical performance and how it expresses its message or ideas. That's most music, right? But there's, I don't know, I guess maximalist emotionality is the best term I could use to describe this. I listened to Blue Valentine. I start the song and suddenly I'm a teenager in the mid-2010s, leaned up against a wall outside of the band room, listening to the song through wired headphones. Maybe I have a poorly kept, swooped scene bang, and of course a lot of unresolved emotions to pan out with the help of NMIXX. From a technical standpoint, the production is wild. We have, I guess, a pop rock bass, a distorted rhythm guitar layered so far underneath a tight percussive trap beat, and then we have these sudden cut-ins of string sections that feel like they were pulled straight from a musical. And then maybe the star of the show, the pacing keeps shifting with these ramping halftime breakdowns in the pre-chorus, the double time bridges. It's disorienting a little bit on first impression, but it kept me locked in. But the chorus is the anchor that keeps us generally in a clear enough headspace to process it all. It is full-bodied, built on these belted harmonies that carry such an emotional punch. Again, there's that old school emo catharsis just baked into this song, this kind of desperate romanticism that thrives on melodrama, and it works because the emotion feels genuine. If anything, this album is a testament that these concepts work only because it is NMIXX performing them. Their vocals are the real anchor through all of this. They're theatrical without being overdone, powerful but still very grounded. I think that's the first tether I was able to attach to my Panic at the Disco comparisons, my emo comparisons to this project. The members lean into that emotion of the song's sentiment about this rumination if a love is truly over, and what that means to our narrator. She'll be the one to keep a fire in her heart, even if it's not reciprocated. She is nowhere near moving on. What a perfect way to open their first full album. Blue Valentine, the song, sets such a distinct tone to all of this. I feel like I've been handed 2 handfuls of feelings and vibes to carry with me into the rest of the project. I'm given, my wired headphones. I'm given my scenic swoop bang. I'm given my Abercrombie zip-up jacket, and I'm moving forward with it. There's this strange emotional residue it leaves behind heading into Spinnin On It, the pre-release to this album. And honestly, with the context of Blue Valentine coming before it, Spinning On It makes so much more sense. Like, on its own, I listened to it the first time, put my phone down, and then couldn't remember a single detail from that first listen. It's a crazy song all by itself, but following Blue Valentine, it kind of clicks. The emotional scaffolding is already built, and in context, the pacing, its energy, the mix of irony and sincerity all start to align. On second song, I'm feeling a really solid narrative structure forming here, or at least a healthy foundation with this pair of songs. Blue Valentine kicks down the door, all chaos and drama and flair. Then Spinnin' On It slows down. Is that the right phrase? I feel like it slows down just enough to make you sit with the feelings you didn't have time to process before. Again, it's this emotional pacing arc that you'd find in a stage play where the second act or the second song grounds you before everything builds back up again. And I think what's so intriguing and eventually fascinating to me is that the rest of the album keeps weaving that emo theatrical aesthetic through completely different styles. One track will, sort of entertain the idea of pop punk guitar riffs, and then the next song feels like a Broadway ballad trapped in some kind of K-pop chassis, right? There's this consistent push and pull between the melodrama and restraint that I am completely obsessed with. It's of course the NMIXX that we expect, but so clearly a version of NMIXX that they're trying to evolve into. I've seen just a little bit of discussions about the loss of MIXXPOP by name. They're no longer announcing that a song is about to shift gears, they're just doing it with no warning. I read that as a sign of maturity and confidence, but I think more generously, it's probably just an adaptation based on the current market. MIXXPOP is something that they've internalized as a response to a growing expectation for sophistication in the industry. It reminds me pretty much exactly of how aespa moved away from explicitly naming the Kwangyan terminology in their lyrics, all the while still carrying the mythology forward in sound and aesthetic. The world building becomes implicit, right? That's kind of what dropping the MIXXPOP label feels like to me at this moment in time. It feels like a cultural and artistic shift. They're moving from explaining who they are to simply just being it. And I guess while we're talking about this, it's interesting that the album closes with both isolated versions of OO. When I first saw it on the tracklist ahead of the album being released, I was like, why end your first full album with the debut track everyone knows? And twice over, right? But I think that's kind of the point. There's something really self-aware about NMIXX choosing to bookend their biggest leap forward with the song that started everything. OO was certainly the height of the MIXXPOP era, where they told us explicitly when to brace yourself for the chaos. I have to mention this every time I talk about OO, but it was number 5 on my Spotify Wrapped in 2022, and I showed it to my friend in class, and all she said to me was, like, she looked at my screen and was like, at least someone liked OO, which is so crazy to me. She didn't mean it in a mean way, but I still think about it to this day. I am an original OO defender in that regard. But anyways, so I think by including it here, it serves as a reminder that they're not abandoning the idea of MIXXPOP. They're instead absorbing it or internalizing it, right? The chaos doesn't need a call out anymore. I think there's a lot of interesting ideas you could conceptually take this going forward. They no longer need to announce themselves or explain their concept. And I think that to me is the most exciting part about Blue Valentine as a debut full-length album. I feel a strong sense that they're trying to bridge the gap between K-pop today and something a little more narrative, a little more theatrical, right? Which I have all the time in the world for. You can only get a project like this that's effective from a group who knows exactly who they are, a group with such an honest sense of vision for the kind of artists they want to be. Reality Hurts. I have to talk about Reality Hurts. Oh my gosh, this song punched me in the face on first listen and just kept me there. Even with my emo sensibilities, I thought that I was prepared for this. My metaphorical swoop bang was not enough to shield me from what this song had in store. It's brash and so loud in the best way possible, dripping with that early 2010s YouTube era scene kid energy, an AMV edit soundtrack song like no other in existence. You want to talk about something so oddly well-researched in its niche. Reality Hurts leans hard into a blend of pop punk and electronic maximalism. The very crunchy guitars that growl through the mix, electric or like static buzzing synths, and drums that sound way too big for the room they're in. It feels like this song could and will fall apart at any moment. There's so much brimming angst and emotion and feeling. It feels like NMIXX is reclaiming that emo recklessness by doubling down on it. There should be no doubt in your mind by the end of this song. This is for all my emos who don't get hyped enough. If you've been done wrong, then this is your song, so turn it up. Yeah, I mean, what a slam dunk. I knew this album was going to be good. NMIXX consistently outdoing themselves. A musical run that will be in the history books for K-pop, but Blue Valentine still managed to catch me completely off guard. The soundscape, the aesthetic choices, the sheer theatricality of it all. It's so out of left field for this group, and yet it lands almost perfectly. It makes sense. Every track feels like it belongs here, like it's serving the greater purpose of fleshing out the album's world. Songs like Rico bring this unexpected Latin-inflected groove, or Flourish. It's sultry and syncopated. And then there's songs like Crush on You and Adore You that sort of slow things down, giving the album room to breathe. The final leg of the album leans into a much more gentle, emotional register, but no ballads. The amount of comments I got in the meantime of this album being released that rejoiced over the fact that there were no ballads is so funny to me. I do think NMIXX could do a ballad, like a classic ballad, but that is a conversation for another day. We rejoice in the meantime. And then Shape of Love, which feels like the perfect closing statement to the narrative concept of the album. It's wistful without being tragic. There's this through line of wanting for love and romance, of reaching out, willing and open, but not demanding what love should look like. I think that's the lesson to pull from here. It ties the whole album together so well. Yeah. in the end, Blue Valentine feels like such a great evolution. The NMIXX we know, of course, but more open to letting, I would say, emotional tone guide the experimentation. It's a surprising approach for NMIXX, but such a great direction for them. I really hope they explore more of this in the future. But yes, these are my thoughts on first impressions. I have a lot more ideas that are just floating up in the air right now that I have to bring back down to the ground that I'm sure I'll be discussing in the coming months on the way to the next comeback. But these are just my immediate thoughts on first impression. Thank you for watching this. If you did, let me know what you think. How do you feel about Blue Valentine and first impression? How do you perceive its effectiveness? What are your favorite songs? And things like that. Thanks again for watching. Subscribe if you want to, and I will see you next time.